To Capitol tonight. As we mentioned earlier in the show, Siena College has a new poll out showing some mixed results when it comes to the PEF contracts, with 70% of New Yorkers saying that they are opposed to layoffs. However, at the same time, more than half of voters would like the governor to close the roughly $2 billion budget deficit that is coming down the pike with cuts, including workforce cuts, instead of tax increases. And when pushed, most of these folks say no revenue increases either. It's very surprising, actually. Steve Greenberg is here with us. He is the spokesman for the Siena poll, the grand poobah of polldom. Is that right?
Sure, why not?
I find this odd.
Well, let's start off with the caveat that there is no law in New York that requires voters to be consistent.
Good point.
And we consistently see that voters are not consistent. So what we have here are two sort of inconsistencies that the voters tell us. You just highlighted one. If there are going to be budget cuts, when Siena gave them 5 choices, education, health care, roads and bridges, parks and recreation, or state workforce, plurality winner, 35% say reduce the size of the state workforce.
Right.
But 70% of voters said that the governor ought to suspend the PEF layoffs, continue negotiating. That's what he wound up doing.
Right.
Now we'll wind up seeing if PEF approves the second deal or if the layoffs go forward. But so voters say, when presented with a choice, yeah, workforce is the area like I'd rather have cut. But when we gave them 3,500 specific people who are going to be laid off, I think voters say, well, wait a second, this is a bad economy. We're in the 3rd year of a devastating recession. Nobody wants anybody to be laid off. So when we gave them a choice of continue negotiations, voters jumped at that. The second anomaly we had in this one was, as you just pointed out, people would rather see budget cuts than revenue increases. But if it has to be done with revenue increases, again, we gave them 5 choices. Which one would you most like to see? Which one would you least like to see? Most like to see business taxes. Why? It doesn't affect them, so they think. Least personal income tax, yet overwhelming support for the millionaire's tax.
Okay. So here's the interesting thing, though. Last year, if I remember correctly, and I mean like when we first started the budget talks, people kept saying, I would prefer tax increases over cuts to services. Am I right about that?
Yeah, but remember also the context that that was asked in. We were talking about a $10 billion budget deficit, and we were talking about huge cuts in education and health care. Education and health care are the 2 areas voters care the most about. They seldom, if ever, want to see cuts in those 2 areas. So at that point, when we were saying, look, the governor's proposed a $1 billion cut here, a $1 billion cut there, they're like, oh, no, I don't like a $1 billion cut to education. I'd rather pay a little bit more in taxes. Now we're giving them sort of this was sort of our baseline, looking ahead to the 2012-2013 budget. Right now, the governor says there's going to be a $2 billion deficit. How would you prefer that he close it? They say spending cuts, but it's not an overwhelming majority. 51-35. It's a majority, but not, an over-the-top majority like we see on support for the millionaire's tax.
You know, the folks that who are supportive of the millionaire's tax, so for
everybody.
Example, well, I mean, I'm talking about advocates, Assembly Speaker Silver, for example. The advocates sent out a curious statement, I thought. They said, the Siena poll shows widespread support for millionaire's tax cuts and for Governor Cuomo, who opposes millionaire's tax, the millionaire's tax increase, I should say, not millionaire's tax cuts. And yet he could be more popular if he would only do what we think that he should do. How could the man get any more popular? He's 70% approval rating.
Right. I don't think he could be more popular. Look, Governor Cuomo has consistently said he's against a millionaire's tax in New York. He now supports it at the federal level, what Obama's proposing. But he said last year...
What choice does he have, really?
But he said last year during the campaign that he was opposed to a millionaire's tax. So this is nothing new. Voters know that about him. Voters like him. I mean, he's got a 71% favorability rating, 5-1 among Democrats, 3-1 among Republicans, 2-1 among, I'm sorry, 3-1 among independents, 2-1 among Republicans.
Just stop for 1 second. I don't want to make the case for the millionaires or not for the millionaires or whatever. I just am wondering if you think, and I know it's not in the poll, but do voters get it when they say, we like Andrew Cuomo, who doesn't like the millionaire's tax for the state, but it's fine for the federal level? Those people are the people who are filling campaign coffers, right? Andrew says no, right? Andrew Cuomo, no. President Obama says, yes, tax the rich, and he has raised an insane amount of money. I mean, it's not hurting anybody in terms of their political
No, I understand.
ability.
And therefore, you have to look at it that the governor is not doing it for a political reason as much as he's doing it because he thinks, whether he's right or wrong, he thinks it's the right thing to do for New York State. What I was getting at is I don't think voters hold that against him because nobody agrees with anybody. You don't agree with your spouse, your parent, any elected official on 100% of the issues. Voters knew this was the governor's position. They like what he's doing anyway. Look, we have voters who were opposed to same-sex marriage, who have a favorable view of the governor, who think the governor's doing a good job. People know they're not going to agree with him on everything, but I think what voters are saying is we like the job that he's doing so far. We like we like him, and you got to remember, 10 months into office, there has not been a case that you and your colleagues or anybody can point to and say, look, he said he was going to do this, then he did the opposite. And I think voters really like that about the governor.
Yeah, and that actually, and we've talked about this during the Insider segment, and a different segment obviously, but that's where things get a tiny bit sticky for him in terms of PEF, because if in fact, and he was quite clear today, if in fact this second vote goes down, is rejected by the rank and file, there will not be a third, because he can't, and there will be layoffs. I mean, you can't say, I will have layoffs and then not do what you said you were going to do, because the voters see that as hypocritical, and they start to get upset.
Right. On the other hand, I think voters in this case said, you know what, look, we know they turned it down, because we told them on these phone calls that PEF turned it down, that CSEA had approved it. But I think what voters are saying is, all right, give them another shot. And everybody's entitled to a second shot from the public's point of view. So give them another shot. I think we obviously didn't ask the question, but I think if PEF votes it down a second time and the governor moves ahead with the layoffs, I don't think you're going to see the public objecting to that, because he did everything he could, the state did everything they could to try and avoid it. I think people recognize that there are concessions that have to be made.
Yeah, it is also curious that, and it's probably a phenomenon that's the same when you ask, do you like the legislature, and everyone says boo, hiss, no, but do you like your legislature?
Exactly.
And people say, yes, I really like my personal representative. It's one thing to say, do you want to cut the state workforce as an amorphous sort of being out there that the pension costs are too high and state workforce is lazy, et cetera. But when you say, do you want to cut these 3,500 human beings who you might know because they live next door, that's a totally different situation.
Absolutely, although the vast majority of New Yorkers don't know any of these 3,500 people. I mean, we have 19 million New Yorkers. Most of them don't know a PEF worker who may get laid off.
Well, maybe they don't know that they know.
Well, but I think it's the point of nobody wants to see a specific layoff. Also, when they say state workforce reductions, when they say they're in support of that, I think a lot of people think that the state workforce is too top-heavy. Maybe what they're saying is, don't get rid of the worker bee, get rid of some of the,
interestingly, because of civil service rules, that is not how things work, generally speaking, right?
Absolutely.
I just want to touch very briefly before we run out of time on Kirsten Gillibrand. She's like treading water, and I wonder why. She's gotten a lot of national press.
She gets a lot of national press, but she does not get the kind of New York press that, say, a Senator Schumer does on a regular basis. Also, legislators, and a U.S. Senator, an important legislator, but is a legislator, legislators don't get the attention of voters except generally during election time. Her numbers were much higher in the month right before last year's election day, in October last year, and in November right after the election. Then the memory starts to fade among voters. You'll see her pick up again next year as we move into her election cycle, but the voters have been consistent in their view of Gillibrand over the last 6-8 months. About a third of voters don't know enough about her to offer up an opinion, but among those who do, it's about 2-to-1 favorable. Her re-elect is about 2-to-1 favorable for her. And look, at the moment, Republicans don't have a real opposition. So you can't beat somebody with nobody. I think right now Gillibrand's in okay shape. Is she vulnerable? Yes, if there's a top-flight Republican, but there doesn't seem to be one on the horizon.
And it seems, though, this is the last time they get a shot at her, right? The Republicans had a shot at her the last time because she had to run for the first time statewide for a seat that she inherited, Hillary Clinton's seat, thanks to former Governor David Paterson. This time she's running for a full 6-year term, her own term, and she's doing it at a time when you're going to have a Democrat, President Barack Obama, on the top of the ticket. Now, he's not terribly popular, as we've discussed.
Although he's still popular in New York. York,
Right.
and he's, I mean, unless something really strange happens, he figures to carry New York in a big way.
Right. Right. Depending on what happens with the
Right.
Republicans, but still. So anyway, we'll be keeping an eye on that, of course.
But she should be, I mean, by all rights, she should be fine. But you're right, this is their last chance, because then she doesn't come up for election again until 2018.
Yeah, and it's pretty much hers for as long as she wants it.
Absolutely.
Steve Greenberg, thank you very much. We will
Thank
be
you.
seeing you soon, I'm sure.